their disturbance is not truly about you. It stems from a profound imbalance within themselves. When a person attempts to manipulate the natural course of life, to bend another's journey to their will, they operate from a place of fear. They believe they are controlling the currents, yet they fail to see that a life built on discord eventually erodes its own foundation. For a time, it might appear as if they are succeeding, but an existence not aligned with truth cannot last. The structure, built on shifting sand, inevitably gives way. What remains is not power, but the hollow echo of their own choices. They misread your nature deeply. That is the source of their inner conflict. They perceived your quiet as a lack of substance. They interpreted your tolerance as an absence of boundaries. They looked upon your gentle heart and saw not strength, but something to be used. So they wove their complex designs, believing you were caught in the threads. What they could not foresee was your decision to simply step away from the web. You chose not to fuel the dynamic. You chose inner harmony over their created turmoil, clarity over their illusion. Your journey inward revealed the nature of their game, and by choosing a different path, you caused the game itself to dissolve. Now, their carefully constructed reality has not just faltered, it has crumbled before their eyes. Those who rely on control are often running from themselves. They seek to manage others because they cannot face the emptiness within. This is the purpose of their strategies, to avoid confronting their own inner state. So when you rise, when you reclaim your own center of gravity, they do not celebrate your freedom. They feel seen. And in that clarity, a storm of frustration arises, because the one outcome they depended upon, your staying diminished, did not unfold. You chose to nurture your own well-being, and this very act of self-restoration feels like a defeat to them. The unease they now carry has little to do with you. It is about the reflection they refuse to see. It is about the dissolution of a control they thought was absolute. It speaks to the reality that their methods have lost their power over you. And that is a disorienting reality for one who relies on illusion for a sense of self. You have become a mirror to their own actions, not through intent to harm, but simply by ceasing to allow harm to be done to you. This is what truly disturbs them, the truth that you did not engage on their terms, the truth that you chose integrity over retaliation, the truth that you departed not with a loud declaration, but with the quiet resolve of someone who is complete. Now they are left with the resonance of their own making, the consequence of their own discord. You see, those who move with intention to control are playing a finite game, not realizing that life is an infinite journey. They seek momentary advantages at the cost of enduring peace. But tranquility is not found in dominion over others. It is found in alignment with one's own truth. This is why they are without it. They are agitated, unsettled, and searching for a cause outside themselves. Not because you caused them injury, but because your inner peace highlights their own inner war. There is a profound energy in walking away from a struggle you were never meant to engage in. It alters the entire landscape they sought to create. It gently forces them to face a deeper wisdom that real strength does not come from controlling others, but from mastering oneself. And this is what you now embody. Your tranquility, your refusal to answer chaos with chaos, your commitment to your own path. This has become a challenge to their illusion. Silence carries its own weight, its own presence, and yours has become a profound statement. Allow them their turmoil, allow them their storm. That agitation is merely a reflection of a deeper disquiet. It is the unease of being truly seen. It is the innate ability of becoming peripheral to a journey you have reclaimed. It is the reality of their influence fading, and that experience is its own form of confinement. You do not need to be a part of it. You have nothing left to demonstrate. You have already found your resolution, not by outplaying their strategy, but by refusing to participate in the game at all. That is resilience. That is freedom. That is your evolution. They believed the contest was about power, but you have shown that the journey is about integrity. And in this, they fell short, not because you willed it, but because they compromised their own spirit in an attempt to outmaneuver life's simple truths. Now they must reside with that. You, on the other hand, are moving forward, free, not just from them, but from the part of yourself that once accepted the discord. And that liberation, that journey inward, is a treasure they cannot comprehend, for it requires a stillness they have not cultivated. Let them have their turbulence. Let their inner storms rage. You have a tranquil inner landscape to cultivate. They viewed your compassion as a space to occupy, which was their most fundamental misjudgment. They perceived your gentle nature not as a conscious strength, but as a void of will. Observing your patience, they assumed it was inaction. Seeing your sincerity, they believed it was a lack of awareness. But this is where a troubled mind always falters. It can only measure the world by its own internal state of conflict. It presumes everyone operates from the same playbook of leverage and self-interest. So when they encounter a soul that is genuine, one that moves from a place of authentic connection, they do not recognize its value. Instead of honoring it, they see an opportunity. They assumed you were unchanging. They believed they could slowly erode your spirit while keeping you tethered, a reflection of their own desires. You offered understanding when they acted from a place of hurt. You allowed space for change when they showed no sign of inner movement. And from their perspective, your grace was confirmation that their path was superior. As if setting firm boundaries was the only sign of strength and offering compassion was a sign of foolishness. This is the distortion that arises when one views a deep soul through the narrow lens of power. But what they could not grasp, what their perspective could not allow, is that compassion is not weakness. It is a profound strength, intentionally expressed with softness. It is the capacity to offer harmony when one could just as easily create conflict. And for a long while, you chose harmony, not from an inability to confront, but from a hope that they might recognize the value of something true. You held a quiet faith that if you showed them what authentic connection looked like, they might be inspired to meet you in that space. That is not a weakness. That is an open heart, and it is a rare quality. So you remained longer than was nourishing for your spirit. You offered clarity they were not ready to receive. You gave warmth to a space that offered none in return. And they used this warmth for their own ends, recasting your virtues as vulnerabilities in their own mind. In doing so, they constructed a narrative where you were the one who was lost, the one who could not find your way without them. This story made them feel secure. It validated their actions and allowed them to believe they were the guiding force. But then, a shift occurred that they never anticipated. The moment when your perception cleared, when the mist dissolved, when the weight of the dynamic became undeniable, and your heart, though strained, knew it had given enough, and you did not erupt, you did not strike back, you did not descend to a place of conflict. You simply withdrew your energy. You ceased to respond. You closed the gate through which they had drawn your vitality. You chose your own well-being. And that, above all else, unsettled their world. Because the one thing a controlling energy cannot comprehend is losing the very presence they thought was endlessly resilient. The one who kept giving even when depleted. The one who was quiet out of love, not fear. They believed the game could continue indefinitely. But a game requires all players to remain on the field. And you quietly gathered your energy and walked your own path with a dignity that needed no audience. Now, a storm rises within them, not because you have done wrong, but because you have finally done what is right for your own journey. When you stopped meeting their turbulence with your calm, when you ceased to allow them to define your world, you reclaimed your own truth, and in doing so, the illusion of control vanished. Now they are left with a simple fact they cannot reshape. You were never lacking in strength. You were abundant in compassion. And they saw this as something to be dominated. Allow that understanding to settle within you. They are not disturbed because you failed them. They are disturbed because you are rising, because your strength has illuminated their own instability, because your inner growth has highlighted their stagnation, because your stillness now resonates more loudly than all their noise. Their disturbance is not truly with you, it is with themselves, though they may never voice it. Because on some level, they know they had something precious in you, and they chose to exploit it rather than to cherish it. This is the path of those who live by control. They diminish the very things that could bring them peace. And by the time the recognition dawns, it is too late. The compassionate person has continued on their journey. The sincere one has evolved. The quiet one has found their center, not to argue, not to persuade, but to walk forward with resolve. And in that moment, they finally see that your compassion was never weakness. It was a gift they were not ready to receive, and one they can no longer access. Now all they have is the stillness, the emptiness, the space left by a soul they thought they could hold forever. And no matter how loud their inner turmoil becomes, no matter how they try to rewrite the past to soothe themselves, a quiet truth remains. They played a game of control, and it dissolved, because in trying to diminish a soul they saw as pliant, they only revealed the true imbalance within themselves. And you are not broken. You are not bitter. You are becoming more resilient, more aware, and above all at peace. Your inner growth illuminated their methods, and for this, they cannot find peace with your presence. You see, when you begin to rise, to heal, to expand beyond the limited reflection they held up for you, you challenge the very ground on which they stand. Their influence was only potent as long as you held doubt about yourself. Their sense of control was tied to your questioning of your own worth. While you were immersed in the fog of their narrative, they could shape reality. They could believe that you needed their direction, that their distorted view was the truth. But as you began to awaken, their entire construct started to weaken. They existed in a world where you remained small, where your potential was veiled by uncertainty and misplaced loyalty. A world they helped sustain, where your self-assurance was gently eroded. Not always through overt actions, but through subtle invalidations, by questioning your perceptions, by withholding warmth, by rewriting shared experiences. These were not mere habits. They were unconscious strategies, rooted in a need to maintain a position of perceived superiority. Because if you ever saw yourself with clarity, if you ever reclaimed your inner strength, it would reveal how fragile their own sense of power truly was. And then the turning point arrived. You began to change, quietly at first. You started to ask deeper questions. You began to cultivate inner space. You no longer reacted from a place of seeking their approval. You no longer rushed to justify your existence. You stopped trying to mend what they consistently disturbed. You became still, observant, grounded. And this stillness was unsettling to them. The more rooted you became, the more the ground shook beneath their feet. They sensed the illusion was fading, and a sense of desperation began to surface. Growth does not only heal you, it casts a light on everything that was out of balance. When you evolve, you bring clarity with you, and that clarity has a voice, even in silence. Your calm presence begins to contrast their inner chaos. Your new boundaries highlight their lack of respect. Your inner alignment reveals their methods of control. You did not need to confront them. Your very being, as a person who would no longer be swayed, became the confrontation. And that is what unsettles a mind that relies on control, being truly seen. For the first time, they were not the author of the story. They could not twist your words, redirect the focus, or distract you with a sense of obligation. You had shifted. You had expanded. And growth makes it impossible to return to old illusions. It is like awakening from a troubling dream. Once you are awake, you cannot pretend you are still asleep. They witnessed this awakening in you, and it disturbed them. What felt even heavier for them was that your growth became visible. Your energy was different. You began to emanate a quiet confidence. The version of you they had painted for others, the uncertain one, the reactive one, was dissolving. In its place stood someone centered, composed, and clear. Their narrative no longer matched the person others were seeing. This inconsistency was difficult for them to hold. It forced them to face their own story. They became defensive. Suddenly, in their eyes, you were acting distant or self-absorbed. But you were not being selfish. You were simply finished being a resource for their instability. That distinction pierced their illusion like a ray of light. You no longer offered them access to your inner world as you once had. No more emotional tides for them to navigate. No more moments of vulnerability for them to use. Your quiet self, possession, became more resonant than anything you had ever said before, and it left them exposed in a world where they thrived on shaping perceptions. Because the deeper truth is this: they never held power over you. They held the illusion of power, granted to them by your own self-doubt. Once you became certain of your own nature, that illusion dissolved, and without it, they were left with themselves. That truth was difficult and uncomfortable. Not because you willed their pain, but because your light revealed the shadows in their own actions. And some cannot stand to be seen in the light. It is easier to resent your transformation than to face their own choices. But you did not grow for them. You grew for yourself. You grew because you were weary of living in a confined space to protect another's ego. You grew because you realized your life was meant for more than mere survival within their story. And in doing so, you broke the pattern. You became the one who stepped out of the illusion. And in that act of self-respect, you became a powerful presence. Not because you were a threat, but because you refused to be controlled. They do not resent you for your flaws. They resent you because you stopped believing their narrative about your flaws. That is what they cannot reconcile. That is what quietly echoes in their mind. Not that you spoke against them, but that your journey exposed the foundation of their world. You forced them to look at themselves. And now, every time they see your peace, your quiet expansion, it reminds them of the path they did not choose. It reminds them that they lost a connection to something pure and true, and they dismantled it with their own hands. That is the beauty of your transformation. It did not just restore you, it revealed them. Your stillness is more resonant than their storm, and that is what they cannot reconcile. You see, when a person is accustomed to shaping the environment around them, they rely on your reactions. They draw energy from your need to explain, your sorrow, your frustration. As long as you are engaged, you are still within their sphere of influence. But when you become still, not from defeat, but from deep understanding, they lose their anchor. Not just the ability to influence you, but the comforting illusion that they were central to your existence. And your silence becomes a mirror from which they cannot turn away. They wished for you to erupt. They wished for you to break, to plead, to demand, because then they could frame the narrative. See, they could say, they are not stable. They are the source of the drama. This is how a controlling energy works. It creates turbulence and then points to your struggle to stay afloat as the problem. They push and pull until your compass spins and then blame you for losing your way. But when you declined to continue the journey with them, when you stopped investing your precious emotional energy, you removed the very element their strategy required, your participation. That is the outcome they never anticipated. That your strength would manifest as stillness. That your greatest act of reclaiming yourself would be to simply walk your own path, leaving no trail back to the old one. They do not know how to interpret this kind of quiet resolve. They perceive silence as an attack, because their inner world is one of constant noise, of conflict, of strategic movement. Your quiet is not merely an absence of words. It signals the end of their chapter in your story. And that is a heavy realization for someone who built their sense of self on being in a position of control. Their frustration now rises because their influence has waned, because they can no longer reach you as they once did, because your detachment communicates more than any long discussion ever could. It says, without a word, my peace is not up for negotiation. You no longer have access to my inner world. And that, more than any argument, dismantles their perceived advantage. It removes their assumed role of being the wiser guide, or the stronger presence. It forces them to sit with the simple truth that they are no longer the center of your universe, that you have reclaimed your focus, your journey, and your dignity. And they cannot twist that into something ugly because there is no raw material left for them to shape. Silence is a confusing language for those accustomed to causing harm without consequence. They expect a fight because a fight implies that you are still invested. But when you withdraw your energy, when you no longer feel the need to justify or defend your peace, it signals a more profound truth. They no longer hold a significant place, not in your tranquility, not on your path, not in your becoming. And that realization is what truly unsettles them. It's not that you had nothing to say. You held oceans of hurt, lifetimes of misunderstanding, volumes of truths they were not ready to hear. But you have learned that not every person is a worthy vessel for your story. Some only listen to find ammunition. Some only hear enough to form a response, not to understand. So you chose stillness, not from fear, but from wisdom. Because when you have seen enough, felt enough, and given enough of yourself away in an effort to be understood, you realize that sometimes the most potent action is to say nothing and continue on your way. And the irony is that your silence is now the most resonant sound in their life. It echoes in the space where your energy used to be. It finds them in the quiet moments when their distractions fade. They believed they would feel stronger by pushing you away, but now they are left only with themselves, and your absence reveals everything they tried to obscure. They tell themselves you are cold, that you have changed, that you never truly cared. But a deep, quiet part of them knows the truth. They were given many opportunities. You did not simply vanish. You offered chance after chance, trying to mend what they kept unsettling, remaining long after your spirit began to feel weary. Your quiet was not abrupt. It was earned. It was the final, compassionate act of someone who had finally remembered their own worth, and the understanding that you are no longer willing to shrink so that they can feel large. That is what remains with them. Let them have their inner storm. Let them cast their narrative into the wind to provoke a reaction. That weight is no longer yours to carry. You do not need to defend your peace. You do not need to explain your quiet. Those who understand need no explanation. Those who do not were never truly listening. What matters is that you are free, that you no longer need to be heard to know your own truth, that you have outgrown the need for validation from anyone who saw your heart as a territory to be controlled. In a world that reveres noise, your silence is your sanctuary. And for those who once drew energy from your turmoil, it is the undeniable end of their story. Their anger is a shield for their shame, and it is a heavy shield to carry. On the surface, you may see frustration, bitterness, or a posture of righteousness. They might cast blame, speak ill of you, or pretend they are unbothered. But deep beneath that noisy surface is a quiet truth they desperately wish to avoid. They are aware of their actions, and they are aware that their choices were out of alignment with their own deeper integrity. The anger is a performance. It's the armor they wear to avoid facing the deeply uncomfortable feeling of having diminished something good, something that did not deserve to be harmed. Shame is a powerful current. It doesn't roar like anger. It flows silently in the deep. It accompanies a person into their quiet moments. It meets them when the outer distractions cease. This is the current they feel now, but they will not name it. To name shame is to acknowledge a misstep. It means lowering the shield, and for those who rely on control, on illusion, on narratives that protect the ego, facing their own fallibility is a terrifying prospect. So instead, they project outward. They find external reasons for their inner state, because looking inward feels unbearable. You became a mirror. That is the fundamental issue. Not because you exposed them, but because you walked away with your own wholeness intact. You did not descend to their level of conflict. You did not play the game of retaliation. And that, more than anything, unsettles them. For someone wrestling with their own choices, seeing the person they harmed rise with quiet dignity is a difficult reflection to witness. It forces them to feel everything they have tried to suppress. Your silence holds them accountable in a way no argument ever could. Every thought of you reminds them of what they did and what they have lost. And that, for them, is the heaviest part. Not the loss of control, but the loss of your respect. Because even if they pretend not to value it, they do. You were not just a person they harmed. You were someone who saw their potential, who offered them grace, who accepted them despite their inner turmoil. And the knowledge that they betrayed that trust, that they dismantled a bridge they lacked the wisdom to cross. That creates a deep sense of shame, but they do not know how to process it. So they bury it under layers of anger and denial. They will cast themselves as the one who was wronged, because it is easier than acknowledging their role in the story's unraveling. They will say you left them, that you were the one who changed, that you were too sensitive, anything to avoid the feeling of regret that lives just beneath the surface. But in the quiet of their own heart, where truth resides, they know. They know you were true to them. They know your heart was gentle. And they know they cannot turn back time. There is a reason they still speak of you, still think of you, still try to reframe the narrative. It is not because they are at peace. It is because they are not, and they cannot be. Because what they lost was not superficial. You were authentic. And now that your presence has been removed, they are forced to sit with the reality of who they are without your light to reflect their better self. That is where the shame dwells, in that empty space. They did not anticipate this outcome. In their maneuvers, in their strategies, they believed they were gaining ground, that they were the stronger force. But strength built on a false foundation eventually becomes a weakness. Because when you betray someone who was genuinely in your corner, you do not walk away unscathed. You carry the echo of that choice. You carry the weight of it, even if you pretend it's a feather. Over time, that weight erodes the spirit. You may never receive their admission. They may never offer an apology or take accountability. But do not mistake their outer posture for inner peace. There is a storm within them now, a storm of their own making, which they must navigate alone. And every time they see you living your truth, growing, healing, and becoming more than they imagined, it stirs the shame in you. Because you were supposed to remain fractured. You were supposed to remain small. They thought that by dimming your light, theirs would appear brighter. But all they did was obscure their own vision. Let them have their anger. Let them project. Let them wear their blame like armor. You do not have to absorb it. Your truth defends itself. And in time, their mask will become heavy. Rage dissipates. Anger is a fire that burns out. But shame is a quiet river that flows on. And when all the dust has settled, they will still be left with the truth they cannot outrun. They allowed something beautiful to pass from their life, not by chance, but by choice. And the ripples of that choice will follow them much longer than they expect. You, on the other hand, are free. You felt the pain, you faced the darkness, and you chose to rise. You let go, not because it didn't matter, but because you knew that you mattered more. That is what creates the difference. You have owned your story. They are still running from theirs. And until they stop hiding behind the mask of anger, they will never find tranquility. Because deep down, they don't hate you. They hate the person they became when they lost you. Their anger is not strength. It is not control. It is a fragile mask, covering a vulnerability they cannot bear to face, a deep shame that has taken root within them. What is now unsettling for them is that this mask is beginning to feel transparent. No matter how loud their blame, no matter how they twist the story, there is a quiet, persistent awareness they can no longer silence. They are the architects of their own suffering. You did not cause their ruin. You did not expose them. You did not seek retribution. But your growth, your quiet departure, your refusal to return to a state of being diminished, that did something far more confronting in their eyes. It revealed that they were never in command of you, only of a situation you allowed. It proved that your value was inherent, not something they bestowed upon you. and now they are in a state of turmoil, not because you wronged them, but precisely because you didn't. You did not lower yourself. You did not become entangled in bitterness. You rose. And that kind of rising forces them to confront the stark contrast between the person they pretended to be and the person you have truly become. The more they witness you finding peace, healing with grace, and journeying onward without them, the more difficult it is to look at their own reflection. They cannot stand who they are without your presence to influence, without your heart to engage, without your gentle nature to absorb. And this, more than anything, is the root of their shame, not just in the act of causing hurt, but in the loss of the one person who still saw the goodness in them, even when they could not see it themselves. This is the part they will never say aloud. You were their place of refuge. You were the one who loved them through their own internal battles. You were the mirror that showed them their own potential, their hope for wholeness. And instead of choosing to grow alongside you, they chose to exploit that love, because true growth requires courage and vulnerability. It demands accountability. They lacked these things, and so they turned on the very person who could have supported their transformation. Now, long after you have found your freedom, they remain captive in the very prison they constructed. Anger becomes their first response because shame feels like a weakness to them. They were taught to control, not to reflect, to blame, not to look within. So they generate noise. But this noise is hollow. It has no foundation in truth. It is a defense, a loud sound to drown out the quiet whisper that never leaves. You lost something real, and you did it with your own hands. This is why they cannot let you go from their thoughts. It is why they run the past and try to reinvent history. They are attempting to outrun their own shame by rewriting reality. But regardless of what they say, the truth does not change. You were genuine. You were present. You were sincere. And they were careless with your heart. They played a game of power and lost someone they now realize they were never truly worthy of. And instead of finding humility in this realization, they lash out. But every time they do, the shame only tightens its hold. Because deep down, they know you never fought them. You simply outgrew them. And here is the truth they cannot bear. You didn't need to ruin them. They are doing it to themselves. The longer they refuse to take ownership of their choices, the longer they carry that invisible weight. And over time, that weight isolates them. It makes them rigid. It taints every new interaction because they have not healed. They have not learned. They have not changed. They are still living in the same cycle, projecting blame onto others while you have stepped into a version of yourself that they will never have access to again. Let that be enough for you. You do not need to explain your path, seek their understanding, or wait for an apology that may never come. Sometimes, your own peace is the only closure you will receive, and it is more than enough. Because while they are trapped in a loop of denial, you are free. You no longer look to them for validation, and that freedom is a form of justice, a quiet, enduring justice that echoes every time they remember how things could have been, if only they had chosen a different path. So let them wear their anger like armor. You know what lies beneath it. You have seen the truth. You have lived it. And now you have risen from it. That is something they will have to live with long after all their noise has faded away. Because while anger may be loud, shame never, ever forgets.